And beyond that, I think some of you are signed up to do the smaller section of Q&A with Jessie while she's here. So I'm excited for that. And everyone will be there on Friday night for the big presentation. So this is a really interesting chapter of this novel. I want to just begin by getting your impressions of, this is the way that we've started really every discussion thus far. What do we know about Marjorie? How does she relate to the other characters that we've studied so far in this novel? And maybe most importantly, what is it that sets Marjorie apart from the other characters that we've run into in this novel? And how is it that she's ended up, of all places, as a high school student in Huntsville, Alabama?
Well, her parents are Ya and Esther. And I think something that I thought was interesting was the fact that she actually has connection to her roots, whereas like all the other characters seem to be searching for their roots. And she still is searching for something, just in a different sense than the other characters so far in the book. Like she has connection to her grandmother, and she like has a life both in America and in Ghana. I also thought it was interesting that they ended up in Alabama, because we've seen other characters in the other family line come to Alabama, but also leave Alabama. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Keep going. And I love that notice about the fact that of all places, she ends up in the American South. So Piper brings up like the first most important thing, right? Like, unlike so many of the characters in this novel, Marjorie has access to her past. She knows where she comes from. She has a relationship with her parents. She has a relationship with her grandmother. And for like all of the book up till now, that's definitely been a privilege. But talk to me about how her being in America sort of complicates this privilege.
Well, like we kind of talked about throughout the novel, how like connection to your roots is a gift, but in this chapter it seems a little bit like a burden as well. Like we see Marjorie kind of grapple with, like, as a high school student, kind of losing touch to her like Ghanaian side, I guess, and feeling like trapped between the two worlds, and like kind of struggle with like being an American high school student while still like holding on to her heritage of like living in Ghana and having a Ghanaian grandmother.
Yeah.
Yeah, also I think like there's this kind of inescapable sense of like difference that permeates the chapter. And I think it's like in some ways she's the first person on that side of the family to kind of start to like retie the two bonds of the one side that was lost, that came to America, and the side that stayed in Africa. But with that, she also has to kind of wrestle with the sense that she's different, not only because of her intellectual interests and kind of the fact that she reads books at school and all these things about her, but also just because she's Black, and that in some way, like Miss Pinkston said, she can't escape the color of her skin in America. And I think it's a hard thing for her to grapple with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I feel like it's like she feels she doesn't like particularly belong in any of both places. Like I feel she's like kind of stuck in the middle.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. And I think you guys have done a good job of unpacking that to begin with. There's a passage right on 263 that I think really puts into play, or really articulates well, sort of what Marjorie is grappling with. So I'm going to read this paragraph out loud to you guys, and I just want you guys to think about what I'm reading and then sort of just try to put an assertion on it and see what you can make of it. So I'm on middle of page 265. Her grandmother saw her wince and asked, "Are you hurt?" "It's nothing." The response was a reflex. Whenever her father or grandmother asked her about pain, Margie would say she had never known it. As a young child, someone had told her that the scars her father wore on his face and her grandmother on her hands and feet were born of great pain. And because Marjorie had no scars that resembled those, she could never bring herself to complain of pain. Once, when she was just a little girl, she had watched a ringworm on her knee grow and grow and grow. She'd hidden it from her parents for nearly 2 weeks until the worm overtook the curve where thigh met calf. making it difficult for her to bend. When she'd finally shown her parents, her mother had vomited, and her father had snatched her in his arms and rushed her to the emergency room. The orderly who came to call them back had been startled, not by the worm, but by her father's scar. She'd asked if he was the one who needed help. What do you guys make of this? This is basically Jesse's introduction to Marjorie as a character. You guys have done a great job of talking about like how she occupies this strange middle ground, but talk to me about the way that Jesse is using the image of the scar and the image of the ringworm here.
I think it's like obvious, like on a very obvious note, it's a lot about comparative suffering. Like in her mind, her pain and anything that she has to endure, because it isn't even close to like what her parents or her like grandmother has endured. It's like she shouldn't acknowledge it. She shouldn't revel in it, I guess. But also it like ties back to what I think Mrs. Pinkston was saying about like what it means to be Black in America versus what it means to be Black in Africa. When she told her that being Black in America, like that alone is enough trauma. And like at this point, she's like just starting to like understand that, I think. But yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Also, too, this ringworm is like the sense that it's like an infected like parasite in a way, and something that grows over time and is kind of like this insidious pain that she's hiding. And I think we've encountered that before in the book. And I think it can be like in some way thought of as a sense of like lessness in a way, or this kind of like, you know, sinister, insidious, like internalized sense of like oppression that has like really gotten to some of the characters. And I think for Marjorie, not only is it like Archie said, it's being kind of in some way lost in the ocean between neither like from the Cape Coast and neither from America. She's really not accepted by either. And she really has to grapple with being alone a lot. And it starts to kind of become her in a sense. And I think that she was unable to kind of tell her family or really complain to them about, you know, how lonely she feels or how difficult that is, because she doesn't want to, you know, compare herself in any way to their pain. And I think that she feels kind of unable to speak up about how she's suffering.
Yeah, and I love what you said there, Vogel, too, about how like the way that she processes this makes her feel very alone. And then what you said was like the aloneness becomes her. And I'm thinking about how like later on we'll talk about her relationship with Graham in this chapter. And I'm just thinking about the heartbreaking moment after he kind of gets off the phone with her and says he's not going to take her to prom. She sort of takes a step back and she says to herself, this is at 17, she says to herself, there would be no such thing as love for her in Alabama. Like she just thinks that she is so alone and so different. But the notion of complaining to her parents about the otherness she feels makes her feel, I think, almost like a spoiled brat, right? Because she doesn't bear any of the physical marks that they bear from their lives in Africa. I also love too that the ringworm here, the exact line is, she had watched the ringworm on her knee grow and grow and grow. She'd hidden it from her parents for only 2 weeks until the worm overtook the curve where thigh met calf, making it difficult for her to bend. Can we just tease out that sort of metaphor a little bit more there? Like, what happens if you don't address the pain? What does the pain then prevent you from doing? What's Jesse using here?
It keeps you like stuck still in the same place. You can't move forward.
That's exactly right. All right, great. Let's talk now. I'm so interested about what her life is like as a student at a high school in Huntsville. So talk to me about the interactions that she has with her teachers, and talk to me about the interactions that she has with her fellow classmates, both Black and white. And then eventually we'll get to a discussion about sort of the impact that Mrs. Pinkston has on her. So what's it like to be a student in America for her, and what are her relationships like with her classmates, at least initially? What stood out to you there?
Well, so she moved from this totally only white school to this school where there were like 30 other Black people. But as soon as she got there, she instantly realized that those Black people are different than her, and that also when her first interaction with them is when they're just she says something and they just mock her for saying it the way she does it in like a British accent, just because she's different, because she speaks like the white man. And that's why they also start calling her oh, I think they start calling her white as like an insult, because she's not like representing their culture, or like so different from them, even though she looks like them.
Good.
I found that was interesting because it's almost like you identify, or people identify not with like the color of their skin, but like just where they like grew up. And if you didn't grow up in that same kind of culture, you're gonna be, identified as different, even though you might be the same color skin or facing the same, challenges of racism and all of that.
I thought it was interesting how in Ghana, she said that the what you were was just what you presented to the world. And if you were white, you're white. If you're black, you're black. But like in America, the black people there, they say it's how you are. But meanwhile, the white people still take on that, the way the Ghanaians thought of like race. It's just whatever you present to the world. So it's like they're giving her a piece of home, but it's like the scripts have been reversed, because it's like now that she's seen as the undesirable one, and instead of them being singled out in Ghana.
I think that's a great comment, and think also too about like that. So that's her experience when she moves from like an elementary school or a secondary school where there are no black students to a high school with some black students. But like, so like Gavin said, like the script is flipped, and she understands that like the politics of racial identity are far more complicated. But like, it's also pretty powerful to think about sort of the lessons that she learns about herself, or the lessons that she internalizes from an earlier point on. Like on 266, when she's much younger, she gets a note home from her teacher. At home in Huntsville, her parents spoke to her in Twi, and she answered them in English. They had done this since the day Marjorie had brought a note home from her kindergarten teacher. The note read, "Marjorie does not volunteer to answer questions. She rarely speaks. Does she know English? If she doesn't, you should consider English as a second language classes, or perhaps Marjorie would benefit from special care. We have great special ed classes here." Like, what's the takeaway from a note like that? Do you think that the kindergarten teacher would send that note home to a white student? Like, and how is this family supposed to react to receiving that note?
I mean, I think it shows that the teacher didn't even take the time to talk to her one-on-one, because if she had just like talked to her after class, she would have like seen that she's like very intelligent and very capable, and that like receiving the note implying that she like requires a special education just because she has like a different culture and background, I think that like implies to her parents that she's like that they just have to work that much harder to make her feel more like developed within American culture, which I think also influences her like constant internal struggle with trying to feel connected to both cultures.
Exactly. That's really, really well said.
I also find it interesting though how like kind of an attempt to kind of make her learn, or I just feel like it says like at home in Huntsville her parents spoke to her in Twi and she answered them in English, how, and it used to be the reverse, how she kind of switches her identity. And I feel like kind of the teacher's words like are sticking with her in this moment, and it's like either way, like she's never enough. Like she can either speak English and like fit in at school and not fit in at home, or speak like Twi and like fit in at home but not at school. And it's kind of like, I think it's just interesting to see like in language like how that kind of identity split is going on as well.
I mean, and I think this is a great segue to talk about the impact that Mrs. Pinkston has, because well, I guess we'll get there, but it just seems to me like so much of what Mrs. Pinkston does with Marjorie is she sees and intuits the struggles that Marjorie is having, and she offers her some potential solutions to mitigate what it is that she's going through. So can we do the dance and talk about like what do we know about Mrs. Pinkston? What's her impact on Marjorie? What advice does she offer her? And kind of how does she help Marjorie navigate like the minefield that is understanding who she's supposed to be and how she's supposed to act as a Black Ghanaian going to high school in Alabama? So give me all your impressions on Mrs. Pinkston, and we'll kind of build from there, and then we'll talk about her relationship with Graham.
Well, she's one of two Black teachers at Marjorie's school, and she kind of like further shows the impact that like teachers have on Marjorie. And like I think one of the first introductions we have is like when she passes Marjorie a cookie and says like they don't know a thing, kind of like comforting her from her interactions with like the other kids at school. And something that really struck me was like when she gave Marjorie the Lord of the Flies book, and Marjorie said she liked it, and then Miss Pinkston said, but do you love it? Do you feel it inside of you? And then she kind of like sends her into this like abyss of just reading books and like using that as kind of a way to escape. And then it says like by senior year, she had read almost everything on the south wall of the school's library. So it's just interesting how like her respect for Miss Pinkston and Miss Pinkston's advice had kind of led her into like reading books as a way to escape from like the oppression and the racism and the confusion she feels like at home, I guess.
I agree with that, and I think that Miss Pinkston is like really important, so much so that she like helped shape the identity of Marjorie, and help her become like a more grounded person and someone that like can relate to others, by books. I mean, she like meets Graham that way.
One moment that struck me was on page 273 when she was Mrs. Pinkston wanted her to participate in this event about the waters we wade in, and it was like for after Black History Month, but I think kind of like raising awareness of Black people. And it was like everyone who's African American should do something. And she was like, I'm not an African American, because she doesn't really feel like that way, like we talked about. She's like in between, like Archie said earlier. And then she says to Marjorie, here in this country, it doesn't matter where you come from. First, to the white people running the things. You're here now, and here black is black. So like it kind of explains how it doesn't really matter, like even however she feels like she is from Africa or not or something like that, but she looks Black, and that's how this country kind of works, and the white people will always think of her as Black, no matter how educated she is or something like that. And that tells a lot about how she should behave in this society, in this racist society, where she just gets judged on by the way she looks, and people make prejudice, like assumes things just from the way she looks.
Yeah, let's keep going with that moment. That's like the exact moment we need to talk about, Julian. And I'm just kind of like wondering in a bigger sense, like, so the moment that May took us to shows us that Mrs. Pinkston is really instrumental in Marjorie's development, because like she sees someone who's struggling to find her voice, and she says, here is a way for you to find your voice by reading, by seeing the stories of others, by trying to put your story next to someone else's. But at the same time, I mean, so how is she building on that by asking Marjorie to participate in the Black cultural event? Like, what else is she's kind of taking it to another level here, right? Like,
I think like, yeah, I think, oh, sorry. I think like she, with the reading and stuff, she's kind of helping her to find in some way something to combat the aloneness that really became her. And the idea, and especially the title of the kind of ceremony thing that they're doing, the water we waded, is not only uniquely specific to her, because it seems like her whole life she's kind of been stuck wading out in those waters between Africa and America, but it's also the first time that someone who's been so lonely and kind of hidden can really share herself with the whole school. And I think like she not only helped her find her voice, but now is giving her a microphone, it seems like, and a way to kind of show her strength. And I think the most interesting thing is that it doesn't seem like other people need to see her. It seems like she needs to see herself as valuable. Um, and I think that like Miss Pinkston is kind of giving her that chance, that opportunity.
And I think that that's wonderful and exactly right. Is there, but now like, so building off of like everything that May said, everything that Vogel said, now let's go back. Like, why is it then important that she says what she says in the moment that Julian took us to? Like, what else is she doing there for Marjorie? Like, I just feel like the May and the Vogel work that you guys just did, those examples like are just like unquestionably examples of someone seeing herself in someone else and doing the best that she can to build that person up. And yet in this very moment, she also does one more thing. So I guess my question is like, what is she doing there? And how is Marjorie supposed to respond to that? What is she supposed to do when she's armed with that? Listen, Marjorie, I'm going to tell you something that maybe nobody's told you yet. Here in this country, it doesn't matter where you came from first to the white people running things. You're here now, and here, black is black is black.
I feel like she's kind of introducing her to a sense of abrasiveness that the other characters have had to deal with, but she hasn't had to deal with. Like, in a way, Marjorie's been like, she's had like both her parents, and she's even had like her grandmother, and like they've raised her a certain way and taught her certain things, and they've tried to protect her as much as they could because they've all been through so much. And here I feel like Mrs. Pinkston's just trying to be like, this is the way it is, no matter what, no matter how anyone in your life feels. She's just sort of like giving her, I feel like, a taste of like what other characters have had to like live through their whole lives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And what's important about Mrs. Pinkston versus the other people in her family? What's different about Mrs. Pinkston versus her mother and father and grandmother?
Mrs. Pinkston grew up in the U.S., so
She's
she
American.
knows like the reality of.
She's like, yeah. And I think too, like, it's almost heartbreaking that a teacher, someone who's supposed to show her the world and give her like confidence in herself, has to put her down in a certain way, and like in some way let her know about her place to protect her, right? And it's like teachers are supposed to lift you up and give you your voice, and she's doing that, but at the same time she's trying to in some way protect her from her own role that she's ignorant of because of where she came from.
And I think too that there's like something a little bit more to that, right? Like we began our discussion in this chapter talking about sort of that metaphor of the, you know, she doesn't bear any physical scars and all of her turmoil is inside, so she doesn't feel like she should talk about her suffering because it doesn't match up with the suffering that her ancestors have had to put up with. But I think in confirming this hierarchy and basically saying that like there is a social strata in this country and white people are always going to be on top of black people, I think her telling her that is also her saying, if you feel pain, if you feel otherwise, if you feel like this is hard, that is justified. Like the struggle that black people go through in this country is not uniform, right? It's not every single black person in America has the exact same struggle, but like all of the separate struggles are real, and all of the separate struggles are justified, and all of them cause pain and confusion. So I think it's like, I think it's paradoxically or sort of counterintuitively, it's another way. Giving her this dose of reality is, at least in my eyes, in my estimation, another example of her building her up, like of her giving her the knowledge and the confidence that she needs to succeed and to keep moving forward as an American.
Yeah, like kind of off what you were saying about how it's okay to feel pain, right? And it seems like she struggled with that. We talked about how because of her father's physical scar, right? It's very visible, it's very tangible. She's never felt like she's able to talk about her pain. But I think what Miss Pinkston is helping her to understand is that like simply being black in America in some way is a physical scar in itself, right? And even though she doesn't think of herself as having wounds that the eyes can see, her teacher's letting her know, like in a similar way to your father, you know, you are set aside because of the way that you look, and that's something that you'll have to deal with and overcome. But like you're saying, I think that gives her strength, and I think like finding her identity, especially through the poem, is what gives her strength in this chapter.
Yeah. to me, like one of the most interesting elements of this chapter is the relationship that Marjorie forges with Graham. And there's a lot going on there. So let's kind of turn our focus to that. Let's talk about how they meet, how they're similar, and of course, like how they are in very key ways different. And maybe a way we could talk about that is sort of just talk about what his life is like in Huntsville versus hers. But let's just focus first on how they met, how they're the same, and how they're different, and why they seem to be so suddenly drawn to each other. I think we meet Graham on 271.
I think they met when they were both reading in the library during lunch. And this was like interesting because they were both like didn't really have much options or friends because they were both like new students, which is one way they were similar. They're also similar because just because of like the color of her skin, she was treated differently as a new student versus how he was treated differently as a new student. Because he was from Germany, but he seemed to like fit in better and like just blend in more than, he had an easier time with it than she did.
Yeah, let's keep talking about like Graham's background. What do we know about Graham? And then we'll talk more about what we're supposed to make of them meeting, like Frank just said, in the library over lunch. I think it's really good, close read, Frank, that you realize that they're both there kind of on their own time. They're both there at a time where the rest of the student body is convening for a meal. They've both sort of separated themselves for that. So what more do we know about Graham? And talk to me more about not just that they bond over reading, but how they bond over reading and how their relationship gets going.
Well, I think it's interesting how he writes her like all these little notes and is kind of using his voice with her, whereas like he's constantly begging to hear hers and she still won't give it up. And I don't know, I think that kind of is interesting when like you zoom out as a whole, like even though like in their certain relationship, like it's not like they have any tension, but it's like the white man has the voice and like the black girl can't use hers or is afraid to use hers, if that makes sense. I don't know, I just found it super interesting how like what exactly was holding her back from like using her voice, even though he was specifically asking for it, and it was like a safe environment in my opinion.
Great question. Somebody try to answer that awesome question that Patty just asked.
Well, I think part of it has like a little bit to do with like romanticization. It's like when they're together in the library, and like I think most of the time like they're not actually talking. And I think it's like in her mind, it's like she's found almost like an equal, because again, she still hasn't really acknowledged what it means, or not. I don't know how to put it, but like in her mind, they're equal because they're both kind of like these loners in a library reading, and they don't actually really like interact. So I think she sort of builds this image of who he is in her mind. And I think he also thinks that they're equals, like the way that it's like he always wants to hear her voice, but all they hear is his. Like there's something where he's like, why aren't you being just like me? And because he thinks that like being like a military brat is equivalent to being Black in America.
Right.
So
yeah, those are excellent comments. And I think something that I'm realizing now, just hearing you guys talk about this, is like Piper was saying like they don't interact, and I would say like, well, they do interact, but they interact in this extremely specific way, which is like they interact in this vacuum where they're not being watched by other people. Like in other words, like Jesse is giving us this scene where two people who have like fairly similar backgrounds or share one fairly similar element to their background can come together in this private way and forge this connection. But they're never doing it until later, kind of like critically, they're never doing it in front of the eyes of their peers, white or Black. Like it's just like they have this little secret area where they can do this. But so, and I think Piper also said it too, sort of answering Patty's question, like, why is it so relatively simple for Graham to write these notes and to like share his thoughts and share what's in his heart and mind with her? because he takes her seriously. I really do think he takes her seriously. I think he views her as intellectual. I think he views her as interesting. I think he's like interested in her like sexually in terms of a relationship. I think he's attracted to her, but like he's so willing to share this and he's so willing to take her seriously and ask her to share something back. But why can't she just say like, oh, Graham is writing notes to me, Graham is bearing his soul to me, why can't she bear it right back?
Well, I kind of might answer my own question a little bit, but I think in a way he's had his voice for his entire life. Like people have been listening to him, and like he's a white person, like it's something he's used to, like it's kind of normal to him, it comes naturally. Whereas for her, she's never really had that before. So I think it's kind of like, and like everybody has that, like the less you kind of talk, the harder it is to talk. So I think it's just kind of going off of like their different roles, and like he's just used to it where she isn't. So I think it's so much harder for her to initially like share her writing. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's just a function of his privilege, right? Like he's always been told that his voice matters. He's always been told that what he has to say is interesting. He's never been told that no matter what your backstory is, no matter where you come from or who you are, a more dominant class of people has already kind of like pigeonholed you as one type of person. Like the everything that Marjorie is struggling and fighting to learn about what it means to be Black in America is something that Graham will literally never have to think about in his entire life. He's just immune. Can we, I don't want to, well, let me just ask you this question. Like, do you view Graham as a bad guy? Is Graham a bad guy? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I think it's like ignorance in a sense, right? It's like he just can't understand, and it's not his fault, right? Like even in that scene where he walks off with the brunette girl and kind of breaks her heart, I think it's not him trying to, it's not like he didn't want to go to the prom with her. It's not like he didn't try, but it's also like he can never understand and he can't empathize. He doesn't know what it's like to kind of have that scar and to be like marked out as different. And like you said, it's just a function of his privilege. And there's a sense too that even he knows like he's got to hide it. Like when she calls and is like, maybe you should park one street over or something. He's like,
yeah, he's like smart.
And so, like I think she's trying to hide it from her parents, but I think in some way he's trying.
I think so. Vogel's cutting out a little bit, but I think
like
that's such a
he
good...
kind of has to fight against the system, school, and the principal and everything. Sorry.
No, you're good. Let's look before we look at that moment with the brunette coming up to them in the cafeteria, as we enjoy the speed bumps of Zoom. Let's take a look at what I think probably my favorite moment in this chapter, at least in terms of like understanding Graham, comes when they go not on the date to the movie and then to like the makeout spot or whatever, but they go on another date later on, and they go to the US Space and Rocket Center of all places. He asks her if she would ever move back to Ghana. She thought for a moment of her grandmother in the sea, the castle. She thought of the frantic commotion of cars and bodies on the streets of Cape Coast, the wide-hipped women selling fish out of large silver bowls, and the young girls whose breasts had not yet come in, walking down the road's median, pressing their faces into the windows of the taxi, saying, "Ice water, and please, I beg." "I don't think so," Marjorie says. Graham nodded and started to move forward onto the next case. Marjorie took his hand just as he was lifting it to press it against the fiberglass. She stopped him and said, "I mostly just feel like I don't belong there. As soon as I step off the airplane, people can tell that I'm like them, but different too. They can smell it on me." "Smell what?" Marjorie looked up, trying to capture the right word. "Loneliness, maybe, or aloneness. The way I don't fit here or there. My grandmother's the only person who really sees me." She looked down. Her hand was shaking, so she let go of Graham's, but he took it back. And when she looked up again, he was leaning down, pressing his lips to hers. it's a pretty intense moment when trying to understand Graham. Can you guys just talk me through your reactions here? Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm poised when I read that moment for him to be like, I totally don't understand you, and just like they drift apart. But that's not what happens.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of the moments where you can see the most things they share together. Because the way he kind of is as a German who's white in America, among other white people in America, like he kind of is part of them, but he at the same time, because he has a different cultural background, and yeah, he just thinks a different way, or like he doesn't know about the class, like he doesn't really know, or like we said, ignorance of the class struggle of like black people. That's just the way she feels when she goes back to Africa, where the other people look like her, but they're not really like her because she speaks proper like the white man English, and also has a different cultural background and this other knowledge from her other culture. So that's like one of the biggest moments that they share.
Something I find interesting about this moment is it's like the last thing she's talking about is kind of loneliness and her aloneness. And like he hears that and then kisses her. And I think it's interesting how he's kind of like combating that loneliness with like something that's kind of like a symbol of love and union in a way. Like I think, I don't know, that's the most he's tried to, or actually, I guess she hasn't given him much to try and understand her, but I think that's him trying to show that she's not alone. But in a way, I think it's kind of sad because there's nothing he can do to make her feel less alone simply because of her identity in America. I don't know.
I thought that the relationship and that kiss was kind of like was kind of showing the the progress that you know black people and white people have made throughout time, and just that because at that time I think I would assume that interracial relationships are
Right.
just like very rare, and just seeing one there is just very, very powerful.
I think that's such a good comment, Archie. I think that like, and my kind of sub question for this section is like, why of all places do they go on a date to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center? Like, what is the purpose of a museum, the U.S. Space and Rocket Center? It seems like an extremely odd place for two teenagers to go on a date. What might Jesse be saying there, given what Archie just said about the fact that in that moment, at least they are, Graham and Marjorie are, at least by appearance, an interracial couple. What do rockets explore?
The unknown.
Yeah, like the next frontier, right? Like it's like to me it's like this great symbol of progress. Like just like just like to me, like in some to some extent, Graham, even though Graham is like totally flawed, Graham to me is a symbol of progress. Like he he doesn't exclude himself from wanting to be with Marjorie because she's Black, which is progress. He cannot fully relate or even really begin to relate to her struggles, which is an indication of how much farther we need to go. You know what I mean? Like he's like this great sort of, again, like if she's kind of caught between two worlds, like he's the representation of like a stepping stone toward a better world for all of us. Can we talk? We're almost out of time. Can we talk a little bit about his decision on page 279? Vogel was talking about that a little bit before. He seeks her out in the cafeteria to check in on her and see how she's doing, because the two haven't been in touch since that kiss. And when they're talking to each other, we have this little interaction. The girl walks up to them. The girl had yet to notice Marjorie, but Graham's lack of attention pulled her glance away from him toward the person who had won it. She looked at Marjorie for only a second, but it was long enough for Marjorie to notice the wrinkle of disgust that had begun to form on her face. Graham, she whispered, as though lowering her voice would keep Marjorie from hearing. You shouldn't sit here. What? You shouldn't sit here. People will start to think. Again, a quick glance. Well, you know. No, I don't know. Just come sit with us, she said. At this point, she was scanning the room, her body language turning anxious. I'm fine where I am. Go, Marjorie said, and Graham turned toward her. It was as if he had forgotten whom he had been arguing for in the first place, as if he'd been fighting simply for the seat and not the girl who sat across from it. Go, it's fine. And once she had said it, she stopped breathing. She wanted him to say no, to fight harder, longer, to take her hand across the table and run his reddened thumbs between her fingers. But he didn't. He got up, looking almost relieved. By the time Marjorie noticed the brunette girl slipping her hand into his to pull him along, they were already halfway across the room. She thought Graham was like her, a reader, a loner. But watching him walk away with the girl, she knew he was different. She saw how easy it was for him to slip in unnoticed, as though he'd always belonged there. It's a complex passage. Can you talk me through what? Yeah.
I think like her whole life, she's kind of been suppressing her pain, like for the sake of others. And finally with Graham, she feels like comfortable enough in order to be vulnerable and to share like her struggles with him. And like obviously it's not his fault, because in the beginning he does like fight for her and kiss her and like show her affection and that he cares. But like at the end of the day, I think like her showing like her vulnerability was kind of in turn like wasn't really returned back to her, like in the sense that he is so easily persuaded to like leave her side. And I think like it does take a lot of courage in this era to like go against the like normality of society, and like in which like Black and white people should not be like a couple. But I do think like her showing her vulnerability to him was kind of a warrant for him to realize how alone she truly does feel. And I just like kind of expected more from him, because he knows like how much she is struggling. But I don't know, I just think this like moment kind of captures like how she feels after like sharing her struggles with him, I guess.
I also feel like this is like the reason why she did this, like why she was so hesitant to share part of herself in the beginning. Because once she became vulnerable, this happened, because this is uncharted territory for her. All her ancestors have been either with Black people, Africans because they wanted to, or they were with the white man because it was either forced upon them or it was an unhealthy relationship. So this is like having a relationship between a white person is like uncharted territory, and it's like it's a scary thing. And especially doing it in America where it's like not, well, I don't even know when this took place, but even still it's not the best thing. It's just, it really showed that she was aware of where she was, and she was aware of the Black experience, but she knew that this would ultimately happen because, well, society doesn't really deem interracial couples as, well, they don't tolerate it.
And I think that's great, Gavin. And I think that speaks what you said at the beginning too. Like, this is why she didn't make herself vulnerable. And the thing that I always think of when I read through this is that like you see that Graham initially is like moving toward making the right decision, but then he does what all white people can do and what Black people can never do, which is like he's like this person who's trying to forge a relationship, but when that gets complicated, what does he do? What does he have the option to do? What does he do?
Leave.
Yeah, he can bounce. That's all it is, right? Like he has the opportunity to say like, all right, like, well, if this is going to be this complicated, then maybe I'm just going to go hang out with people that look like me. And then I don't have to think about any of this stuff, which is the way that most people basically live their lives, right? Like, I think that like maybe the greatest representation of white privilege is like just kind of opting out of the conversation. Just like not
And
having.
I think it's interesting when it says like she saw how easy it was for him to slip in unnoticed, as though he'd always belonged there. Like it's kind of like, even though they both found each other through loneliness, like he has kind of the option, like that kind of fallback of being able to fit in, like as soon as their relationship doesn't go well. But she doesn't have that, and I think that's why like she feels her loneliness so deeply, because it's like she'll never have that ability to just like effortlessly go in a crowd, and whereas he does. So it's kind of like her loneliness, even though they both were like originally joined by their loneliness, hers runs a lot deeper and it's a lot harder to deal with.
Very well said. Okay, we're out of time. That was wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your close reading and all your great comments. I really appreciate it. And I also just wanted to say thank you to Sophia. Thank you for joining us. I know that it's like not the most natural thing in the world for you to just like hang out on this Zoom. But anyway, I think that this was like a really good representation of like a typical discussion at St. Andrews. We heard from basically everybody. We made a lot of progress. We didn't get all the way through the chapter like always, but we'll kind of pick up there when we see each other next on Friday. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great sort of rest of your virtual visit back day. And I hope that I don't know, I hope you can find a home at St. Andrews. I know it's a great place for all these kids and a great place for me. So thank you so much for joining us. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good job, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Torrey,
Yes.
sorry about the name. It
Oh,
was,
no problem. I just thought
okay, it was from library
kid.
trivia last
Okay.
night or a couple nights ago, and I don't know how to change it, but I figured it out. Okay.
Don't worry, Julian. Have a great day. Thank you for all your work.
Okay. See ya.